Hello, everybody who is here or who's watching this. Welcome to How to Pick Your MCAT Study Resources. Our little webinar here with Sketchy. You can see our fun art and our little, they call that a word mark in the lower left-hand corner, where it's like the name of the company, but it's also like an icon. It's called a word mark. That's like a big, it's when you have somebody who tells you these types of things, the term of art. Anyway,
learn something new every day.
Yeah, right, there we go. So look at that. Everybody here is learning things. So welcome to our Sketchy webinar, made in partnership this time with Blueprint. And Paul is joining us, one of Blueprint's excellent instructors. And I'm just going to introduce ourselves a little bit. Paul, I'll start with you. Talk to me a little bit about yourself, and our third bullet point underneath each of us is we like to do one little extra fun fact with every one of these webinars we do. And this time, because we're talking about study planning, the question is, tell me, what is your perfect Sunday? Which is a movie reference, which was maybe a reference to something else. I don't know if anyone gets that. But it brought me some joy, and we can talk about our favorite Sunday. But yeah, Paul, talk a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Paul. I'm a Blueprint instructor. I actually prepped with Blueprint for my own MCAT. I'm currently an MS2 down here in San Antonio, Texas at Long School of Medicine, and using Sketchy for medical school as well. And I'm currently training for an Ironman, so I'm a little more planned out on my perfect Sunday than I would like to be. But big breakfast, like bacon, eggs, some type of potato, a nice cup of fruit, and then coffee. And then a nice like midday or like late morning swim. It's pool day on Sundays. And then afternoon, I'm either bird watching. My girlfriend is a zookeeper working with birds at the local zoo. So we picked up bird watching. I'm now into old age. Or if the weather's bad, watching a movie.
Yeah, Paul's got the entire poker hand of really interesting hobbies, and I think he's going to beat just about anyone else who he meets. That's really amazing. Is that how you train for the Ironman? You pick a day, like this is a swim day, this is a run day, this is a bike day. Is that generally how it goes?
Yeah, so this is actually I'm training for my second Ironman, so I've kind of learned from the first go around and a little bit of adjustment. But yes, you have like a bike day, run day, swim day. And every once in a while, you have a day that you kind of do two things. And then you definitely need a rest day.
Wow. Sounds a lot like MCAT study. It's almost like, I mean, if you had to fake it, just to make a analogy to MCAT study, it probably look the same. I'm not saying you're faking it, but be it. Hey, as for me, my name is Adam Gray. I work for Sketchy as our head of educational programs. I have spent just way too much time around the MCAT in my life, so you don't have to. Not you, Paul, but you, everyone else. Sometimes we like to share like what our MCAT scores are like as teachers. What's funny is I always say my MCAT score it's complicated because I'm not allowed to take the MCAT. It's like, it's not as dramatic as it sounds. Or like, I don't think I'm actually like literally blacklisted, but I kind of am. Like, I did try to take it and I got a message that said, don't take this. We know you work for a test prep company. Call us immediately, which is like, if I really wanted to call them and like really like perjure myself and be like, no, I only want to go to medical school. Like, I just wasn't gonna do that. So obviously, in my life, I take a lot of practice tests and things look fine there, but real MCAT scores, I've had an interesting journey to it. But my perfect Sunday is actually just pretty simple. I think any Sunday is pretty close to perfect if I can just wake up whenever I want to. So Paul is up very early, huge breakfast, swim day. I am up pretty late and just very happy about it. Not very exciting, but I hope pretty relatable and definitely very true.
Do you allow alarms related to cooking? I said no alarms allowed.
No alarms allowed. I guess I do when I cook on Sunday. So no wake up alarms. What do you call an alarm? What do you call what do you call an alarm that is usually just, I think the generic alarm is waking up, and then like a cooking alarm is a cooking alarm. Very interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
So we are going to go through today just how to think about MCAT resources. Like what kind of stuff out there helps you get ready for the MCAT. This is intended for people earlier on in their prep. No matter where you are, there should be some useful information for you, and we hope you can apply these tools. But we're really hoping to get a good fundamental baseline understanding so that a lot of these basic questions are just answered by people who know what they're talking about. And then you can move ahead, get your resources, and make your study plans. So we're going to talk through what that looks like, and then just have some parting thoughts. So I'm actually going to start with a disclaimer, and it's that everything that we say, we're going to talk about archetypes, we're going to make recommendations, we're going to say what you should do, but your prep is going to be unique to you. I mean, this is true about any kind of prep that you do, any kind of studying you do. Your schedule is going to be unique to you. Which things you prioritize need to adapt to what exactly you need. One size fits all is not the way to go. Of course, budget is important, and where you are, if you're a non-traditional student or if you just finished taking biochemistry, you're going to be in a different place. So if you hear advice from us or from anyone and you're like, no, I have a very good reason why that doesn't apply to me, you're probably right. But most of the other things that we say are going to be true. And with that, I want to dive into the first big separation between prep programs in the MCAT world, which is the world of self-prep versus comprehensive prep. Paul, tell me a bit about how you would describe each of these two systems.
Yeah, I kind of like to view things on a spectrum. I think these are the extremes. And so, like you were saying, it's really based on where you're at just when you start your prep. And for people that have a really solid foundation in the sciences, maybe they've done a diagnostic already, and their score, like, they're not like too upset with it. They have a goal score that's pretty like within reach. Self-prep is where I would kind of shepherd those people that you don't necessarily need to have it all laid out for you. And then on the other hand, like you have people that for a variety of reasons just need more guidance. And that could be that, hey, I'm like a procrastinator. And if it is not scheduled out for me, I'm just not doing it. And that's where a comprehensive plan can really help you out. Or maybe you just have a lot more content area weaknesses. I kind of, when my own MCAT prep journey was a non-traditional student, and I was not a science background. And so on that kind of continuum, I was kind of in the middle, but more so towards that comprehensive at times, just because I needed that science background for test day. And so I kind of view it as a spectrum, with those being the extremes. Adam, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the way I think about it is you shouldn't let what kind of program you choose dictate the resources and practice you ultimately do. And a lot of it depends on guidance. And that's where I would also put the focus, like you said, is do you need that kind of hook of accountability? And if you do, is that something you need from a program and a teacher often? I mean, you can argue about what comprehensive means, and you mentioned it's a spectrum, but generally when you say a comprehensive course, you mean that you go to a place like Blueprint, of course. I believe you're probably teaching some of those courses right now, Paul. And you sign up for a class that has a schedule, and you have a teacher, or usually multiple teachers nowadays. And if that is what is going to keep you motivated, then it's kind of what you should do. But as long as you need some hook to keep you motivated. Maybe you have proven to yourself you can just take on a load of studying and you don't need those extra hooks. Good for you. You're lucky. You go very far. But you can also find communities at your school or online or other accountability mechanisms. Maybe just making one big study plan, study calendar at the start of your prep will allow you to really motivate yourself as a self-prep user. But the big difference between what these two sides really are you getting one thing that kind of solves all your problems and has all the resources you need? Or are you getting multiple things that allow you to piece that together and pick and choose which of those resources you would rather do? A QBank from one place, some content review from another place, full length from another place, that kind of thing. And of course, the self-prep option also tends to be easier on your budgets. Not such a not as large a deal. So if you are here and you are watching this, you probably already have a good idea of which of these that you're doing. I will say that what we're going to talk about is mostly going to be focused towards self-preppers and not so much towards comprehensive preppers. Though if you are in a comprehensive course, you'll notice that whatever schedule you are given kind of comports with what we're going to talk about. There are QBanks, there are content reviews, there are classes, there are full lengths. And of course, they're put together that way because this is the good way to structure those sorts of things. And so it gives you a little peek behind why it's structured that way and probably can help you utilize them better. So I want to move on to, we were talking about what to add to this. So this is, I don't know if it's worth it to try to read this circle. Paul and I are not going to read this circle. You can if you want. It's on the AAMC's website, the test maker. And someone really put their heart and soul into it. I'm not gonna, I don't know who it is. I'm sure they're a very nice person. But this is a good example, I think, of its heart is in the right place. If you're like, oh, look, these 7 steps, I will briefly review, and then I will have a short set of questions, and then I'll learn from my errors, and then I'll review again, and then I'll summarize, and then I'll do this and this. There's a lot of good things here that is not necessarily in a usable like to-do list. And that's what we're hoping to transform. But by using something from the test maker and bringing this in, we want to show that the underlying recommendations of how you study and what these techniques are, it's not like an absolute secret. We're not going off, off into the wild here. Like the people who make this test recommend you use these sorts of tools we're about to talk about. And it breaks down to things like choosing a topic, studying it, testing yourself along the way, using tools like self-summarizing. That's just like a good, like little hot tip if you've never tried it before. And then eventually getting larger mixed and representative assessment during the end, which of course then loops in to the beginning again. Paul, how do you feel about the kind of self-summarizing piece here? It's an oddly specific element, but I think it's just a good, before we dive into the actual, here's where you start, finish different types of resources, a good little tip that's interesting to cover.
Yeah, I think the reflection piece, which I include like self-summarizing in that when I kind of go through a less than 7-step approach. But I think that self-reflection is very important, especially for the MCAT. And I've noticed, I've done a lot of tutoring, a lot of classes, that it's often the first thing that gets like axed out of people's schedules when they're cramming and they're like, okay, I'm going to still do my content, I'm going to still do my practice. And where they like make up time is they cut off like that whole just kind of self-reflection where they go back and look at that practice, see what they did well on, see what they did poorly on, and then look at what they did poorly and well on, and then go back, revisit and summarize that info. And there's multiple ways you can do that, but I think I've seen that get cut off kind of first when people are chopping to save time. And honestly, I tell a lot of all my students that is one of the most important things. It's not a waste of time to summarize that kind of content and to reflect on your practice. And so if you're cutting things due to time, please don't cut that out of your prep. And we'll talk about that more when we kind of get into the little more detailed look at this kind of schedule and your learning cycle. But it is, I think, very important.
Yeah, and one thing I like about what we are gonna talk about as we go through is the way of choosing and selecting your resources. I mean, this session is called How to Pick Your Resources. We're not going to like take you to the store and say which resources you should take off the shelf. I mean, first of all, let's be honest, the two of us are going to be biased about what resources you should pick because we put a lot of our effort into the resources that we make at Sketchy and Blueprint. But also about how to pick your resources. on a smaller cycle, like a regular basis. Like, how do you pick your resources that you're going to cover this week or that you're going to do today? And we're going to leave some optionality open that kind of forces you to do some self-reflection because you have to actively choose. And so I think it's built into the system. And yeah, I'm very big on metacognition. This is any students who have been in classes of mine, I use it by name, but also I apply it all the time. I'm constantly asking students, hey, how confident are you in what we're about to study today? How do you feel about at the end versus at the beginning? Repeat back to me something else, something you've learned. What will you remember about this session? Or go back to what you were thinking. Self-reflect to solving this question. And every one of you who got it wrong, because they'll say who picked what, and a lot of them will get it wrong, so it'll be a hard question. Every one of you got it wrong. Tell me right now, where did you go wrong? Because I'll show you the explanation and how to go right. Where did you fall off? And that just unlocks exactly how to do it right next time, So it's a really big deal at large and small levels. So this is now the main piece here of how to choose resources and how to structure things. And we have divided the types of MCAT resources. And in a self-prep world, these are often individual things that you can purchase for your program, but in a comprehensive world, it includes all of them, but there are also bundles that combine 2 or 3. They fall into 3 broad categories: content review, Q banks, and full-length exams. And we're going to use these icons sort of throughout, just as a little reference for these different ones. And I'm not going to go too in depth on how to identify which one is which. Typically, they're called one of those things. If it is a book or uses the word review, or it's a bunch of, for instance, video lessons, or lessons that include a bunch of video, it's probably content review. Things that are Q banks called Q banks. Things that are full lengths called full lengths. As one example, if you buy the AAMC official test maker resources, they've got about half and half, like full lengths, and what I would call, for the purposes of this, Q banks, because it's a bunch of mixed practice that you can take. And so taking this to the next level, this is how you would sequence in a schedule these different types of resources. And there's more than one role that will be played by content review and by Q banks, and we will talk about that in a little bit, because we're going to go into each of these in depth. But the way to read this, and it's a good thing to screenshot, for instance, is if you're planning your prep from the day 1 to test day, however long it is, there's a reason there's no x-axis here, because sometimes you'll spend 2 months or 3 months or 6 months or 2 years, studying the MCAT. Imagine this stretches over your entire prep. This is about proportionately when you should do and start and end these types of practice. And yeah, Paul, what kind of thoughts do you have about planning that study at different lengths, but also where some of these sort of start and end?
Yeah, so I always tell my students that this is like the idea, and then the actual implementation of it is really going to be, like, the nitty-gritty is going to be dependent on your size, just your situation. And I like to also kind of describe it as wedges for the content review and then the practice. And the wedge or ramp for content review for a lot of students is going to be having, like, the tall side on the left. And so you're going to start off with a lot of content review. And then that's just going to naturally kind of wean off as you just become more comfortable with the content. And as you cover the content on the MCAT, at the same time, we have the ramp for practice, so focused review and full links, that starts to build up. And so as you're getting more and more of that content done, you're also increasing that practice. Oh, yeah, I love it.
I think this is visible to everyone.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Then, right, this is a ramp. And let's see, can I draw this one now? And it's like your practice and your full lengths kind of ramp up. That's what you mean by the wedges.
Oh, beautiful. Right, exactly.
There. I got a little Shel Silverstein action, the missing piece. That's what I've got there.
Yeah, I love how you have them overlapping too, because I think a lot of people want to just do all the content first. Like, no, I need to do all this content before I'm doing like questions on it. Like, I'm not going to go into a final for my like bio class in college without studying all the content. So why would I do that now? But the MCAT's a different monster, and it is okay. And I really encourage you to actually start that practice before you're done with all your content. Yeah, get the majority of it, especially if you're weak in specific areas. Like if you don't know your amino acids, learn them. And then have that practice overlap with that content.
Yeah, that's, I think, paralyzing sometimes, of like, I hear you're supposed to do your content review, and then you're supposed to do your practice. And you kind of got to just take it by feel. You shouldn't finish all of your content review, you go to practice, because honestly, even though you call it content review, we'll get in depth into a little more about what these means, but the box on screen that says content review, think of that as 100% of the MCAT. You just start eating on the left side and you finish eating it when you get to the right side, where you will just get through everything that's in the roadmap, or your entire book set from front to end, or your entire course from front to end, or what have you. But content review, notice there's the little play button next to the line down below too. When you say focused review, that is also content review. You're revisiting those as well. And so while you want to have broad strokes of, I want to finish my main content review time around this date, as you can see here, it's maybe 3/4 of the way to test day, maybe like 2/3 of the way to test day. You will start mixing in practice, and it'll be a wedge. It'll kind of peter out as you get closer to the end, and you have to start kind of just thinking on your feet in terms of what you're going to do in a given day, what you're going to do in a given week. And we'll get to that actually just in a little bit. So without further ado, I think I need to turn off the draw tools in order for me to actually advance. There we go. So we're going to talk about each of those gray boxes in turn for a couple minutes each, just to define what they mean, because I think if you knew what all these meant, then maybe that last slide was just like, aha, yes, of course. But doing a little bit of a deep dive, your diagnostic exam, as a lot of programs call it. If you don't have a program with something that's called a diagnostic exam, you should take a full-length MCAT as soon as you can in your prep, because you're gonna do badly on it. Like, that's enough. I'll jump right to that. It's the number one question I always get. Oh, when should I take it? I'm afraid I'm going to do badly on it. No, you should. I mean, don't be afraid, because it's just going to happen. Like, there's no reason to be afraid about it. You're going to do badly on the first full length that you take. You might as well do it right away, because you're also going to learn a lot. And you should still, consume the MCAT content from stem to stern in some order, but you're going to know what to focus on and what cares most about. You're going to go back to your memories of your diagnostic exam more than anything else as you do all of your content review and all of your prep. And without those anchors of, I remember when I messed this up, I got this one wrong, I wish I had gotten it right, it's going to be harder to focus on what's the most important. Paul, what do you think about diagnostic or first full-length exams?
I mean, I think this is day one of your MCAT prep. You're like, I don't want people studying before prep. Like, the score doesn't matter. Like, med schools aren't going to see your diagnostic score when you apply, and so bomb it. Like, I took mine and I was in the 6th percentile for biochem. Like, I did better than 6% of people, and med schools don't see that.
That's very proud. Very, very glad you could say that. That's, yeah.
I mean, it told me like, hey, this is where I really need to focus. And so that, like, I did better on psych soc. And so that way, like, when I was doing my content prep, I knew like, okay, I really got to dial it in on this biochem. I have some big gaps, and the diagnostic shined more light on that and really told me like, hey, XYZ, you're really struggling on this. But you're not, no one's judging you on that. And so I think that's the big thing. Like, no one's going to judge you on this, and it's really for your benefit. And so take that day one, and then that really can help you figure out like, hey, do I need 6 months to study for the MCAT, or can I do it in 3 months? How are you looking before you start really getting into the details of your plan.
Yeah, very good point, and thank you for sharing that vulnerability, Paul. I really appreciate that. And I mean, here you are. Now you're literally teaching other people about the MCAT. So you're living proof of how much improvement you can have. And if you hadn't taken that, you never would have. If you hadn't taken that and learned that, you never would have focused your prep in the right way, in the big ways of like, oh, I better actually do this part in depth. And also the little ways of just, like I said, the memories of that. So I want to move on talking about content review. Big part of MCAT prep, should take a lot of it and a lot of time. And the time between when you take your first full length and when you take your second full length, it's going to be pretty long. If you have multiple months in your prep, if you have a 6-month prep schedule, whatever, it's going to be months probably, and that's fine. But what it means is you need to have a very tight and disciplined content review calendar where you know exactly how much time you're spending every day. You have your week set out, whatever it is, whether it's book chapters or video lessons or what have you, exactly what you're getting through in a day, in a week. You kind of budget in time for assessments. Sometimes you want to be a little bit rough the first week and like see how long things actually take you and then plan differently for the second week. Yeah, it's really about staying disciplined because it is a lot. I mean, if you have a book set that covers everything on the MCAT, there are several of them out there. They are like over 3,000 pages of like textbook stuff. Like this is a lot of stuff. And so a lot of it's about discipline. It's about continuing, and it's also about assessing yourself. Almost every content resource you have is going to have some assessments. Anyone worth their salt is going to have some intermittently. And so use those to know whether you're doing well. And if you flop on a quiz right after a lesson, go back because you didn't learn what you had to learn. And if you did well, go back anyway, but like later, and just like know what to come back to. What other tips do you have for content review, Paul?
I think the thing that helped me a lot, and I kind of learned the hard way, but this helped me with MCAT prep, and it's actually still helping me in medical school, is I get granular when I like pick an order and I make the schedule. I tried to, like in my undergrad classes, I could just kind of do like, oh yeah, I'll study something on Thursday and I'll study this next week. But when you have this like sheer just mountain of like info, I failed doing that. I tried it for a couple of weeks, and then I ended up having to really schedule out like, okay, from 8 to 10 on Monday, like in the morning, I am reading like these 2 chapters, and then I will schedule in a break, and then I will schedule in like 30 minutes of maybe hitting some flashcards. And so really actually like go in and paper schedule or make an iCalendar, Google Calendar schedule where you actually like, schedule out your day. And I still do that in medical school now. That's a habit that I formed during MCAT prep, and that has stayed with me and still helps me to this day. May not be required for everyone, but it was the first time I had to get that granular on my schedule. So it may be something that you have to make the leap to if you were a previous kind of play it loose kind of person.
Yeah, that there are people out there. I know they're out there. I don't want to name names, who all the structure they'll give is, well, I want to finish my content review by the end of March. And then they'll just kind of work, like open their books and work on things when they get a chance. You will not finish your content review on time if you do that. Make sure that, however you can subdivide it, the more you can subdivide it, the better. If you're not a really organized person, make this your exception and become a more organized person just for this. And of course, it will continue to be true through everything else that you do. I'm going to move on to full lengths and focused review here, because this is what the second half, last 40%, give or take, of what your MCAT prep is going to look like. I mean, I think the minimum number of full lengths you should take before you take the real test is like 5, including your diagnostic. Most students aspire to take more at least, especially if they're really trying to get higher score improvements. But in general, you want to count back maybe 5 or 5, 6, 7, 8 full-length exams. And assuming your schedule allows it, have one every week. Like count back weeks from your real test. And that'll tell you when you should start taking full lengths every week. And what's your advice, Paul, on how to use those full length results to structure everything that happens in between? You know, you take full lengths on Saturdays. What do you do the rest of the week?
Yeah, this is where I deviate from the AAMC's 7-step circle, and I have Paul's 4-step cycle. But take your full length, like do it, finish it that day. It's gonna be a long day. Relax that night, like take that night off. Next day, review it. And I don't just mean looking through it like, oh, I missed that, got that right, missed that, got that right. Like this is gonna take some time. Like, why did I get this incorrect? Did I misunderstand the passage? Was it just a kind of silly test taking error? Was it a content deficiency? And I like to keep a journal actually of like those reasons. And so I review the exam and I kind of keep a journal. We call it Blueprint a lessons learned journal. And so it's it's a journal of like what went wrong for that full length. And then I say use that to determine the rest of that week until that next full length. What do I need to practice? Do I need to go back and hit some specific content? Do I need to practice going through passages? Maybe figure analysis is just not working out for me. And so use each week's full length after you review it to determine that next week's content or strategy practice. So those are kind of I think it's three steps that I just have people do it again and again and repeat that 3-step cycle every week when they're in that full length phase.
Yeah, the line I try to draw is when I take a full length, I'm gonna review it. It might take a whole day to review it. That's what you should expect it will take. Sometimes it will take less and it'll be fine, and you can either get a little bit of elbow room or do some additional practice that day or whatever. But like reserve a whole day to review it. And when you take a full length, you're gonna get a lot of questions wrong. Even people get extremely high scores get plenty of questions wrong because the MCAT has a lot of questions on it. And the line I try to draw is make sure in the week between your full length. So same thing that you said, use it to plan that week. Make sure that by the time you reach the end of that week, you would have gotten every question right that you got wrong last week. And what that often means is revisiting that full length actually multiple times in the week. You revisit it once when you review it, and then you come back to it on Thursday or whatever after you made a list that you can check off of, oh, this passage was on transcription enzymes and I bombed it because I froze on transcription enzymes. So you go back to transcription enzymes and then do that for every other passage that you got. Or every other question where you got it wrong because of content or what have you. And by the time you finish that, go back through the full length again and be like, oh yeah, I reviewed all these. I know it now. That's the bar that you need to set, along with keeping a basic rhythm of finishing the rest of your content review, because often you will be through this, mixing in some QBank and mixed practice as you go, just to kind of keep yourself fresh and thinking in MCAT mode, and doing your CARS reading every day as well, which I don't think that's what's literally next, but don't worry, we'll get there. Speaking of mixed practice though, Paul, what has been your experience, especially in more recent times? So I think there've been a lot of like new QBanks that have sort of like hit the world, recently, or especially in the sort of like post-pandemic world, lots of different tips. And I know you've taught a lot of classes. How do students take to QBanks? Does your average student like know how to use them and integrate them into prep well, or should it come with a user manual?
I found this to be pretty mixed. It kind of depends on if they've had friends that have taken the MCAT journey before them and what advice they're getting from those friends. But I think a lot of people, and this is something I've noticed in my classes, this is kind of specific to students taking a more kind of comprehensive approach, is that they tend to really kind of want to focus more on the content and less on this kind of mixed practice and the QBanks. And so they kind of sleep on it a little bit. And then once, I mean, I kind of just taskmaster, like drive them to these Q banks. And then I feel like once people actually start getting into the Q banks and sinking their teeth into them, they see the payoff and they're like, oh, okay, I see why I should be doing this kind of practice that isn't just a full length. Because I mean, it's like a whole day to take a full length, and you do that too often, you're gonna burn out. And Q banks are the great way where you can get MCAT like practice like every day if you wanted to, and not burn out because you're not spending 7.5 hours in like a cold library room taking a full length. And so students that have kind of bought into it and given it a shot, I've noticed a lot of my students really kind of appreciate it, and then I don't need to remind them at all on Q banks. They see it pay off just in their comprehension and in their comfort with taking MCAT and like the practice questions and the passages and the timing too.
Yeah, one underappreciated aspect of Q banks, I think people will say, oh yeah, more practice, the better, let's go, is you should be reviewing your Q bank quizzes just like you review your full lengths. It's just a smaller cycle. But also, I mentioned when you're in your full length weekly cycle near the end of your prep, or sometimes bi-weekly if you're a really long one, you do have to customize it to yourself. I said you should get to the point where you would have gotten every question right because you came back to the content that was involved. That's not the only reason you get questions wrong, though. Often you get questions wrong because you mixed up a couple answer choices, or you misread something, or you were time pressured, or what have you. That's a little bit harder to really say, oh man, I wouldn't get it wrong next time, because it's like this immediate cognitive, like performance type thing. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but it's like you can't just say, oh yeah, I'll finish the Iron Man this time. You got to condition yourself over time. And taking Q bank quizzes, or similar to Q bank style things, if you have just general question banks, but like taking Q bank quizzes in the subject area where you struggled is the way you train and remediate those like little cognitive, let me just oil the gears a little bit more skills. And for cars as well, in particular, because cars is all of that. And so that's one of the reasons why this is a really important piece of your prep as you get towards test day as well. And I told you we would get to this one. Halfway decent segue, because I was just talking about cars. Now, cars practice, I think people tend to get, or kind of get, like it gets a little intuitive after you do some of it. You're like, oh, let me do a passage a day, and you can kind of look at how many passages there are in this bank, and you can do one a day, and you can get lots of practice, and that builds your skills, and it's great. You look at explanations and you apply your strategies, and that definitely improves your skills. But it is really frustrating if that's all you do, because you won't get better nearly as fast as you want. Because a lot of what drives your cars score is not your experience with cars questions. It's your experience with the kind of reading that you will see. And there are not enough cars passages on earth in every MCAT prep book you could ever buy to give enough reading to bring up your like first read comprehension skills that you really need to succeed on cars. And so it's a long road, don't get me wrong, but if you want to improve your cars score and just improve like your future professional life, needing to read lots of complicated things and read them efficiently and so on, seek out difficult cars like passages and read them every day. I consider it like your daily commute, like I have here on the screen. Yeah, maybe it's not the favorite thing about your life, but like, it's good for you. Like, you got to do it, got to go to work. What are your recommendations on the daily cars grind, Paul? I'm wondering how you feel about this.
I feel the same way, and I feel it because I got to experience the benefits of not being a science student during my undergrad. I was a history and philosophy double major, and so my whole undergrad was reading cars like passages, often things that were a lot more difficult. And that kind of 4-year lead up was really helpful in just feeling comfortable and not stressed out when I would get to these cars passages. And so I tell people, like, you can find a ton of free journals online, and you don't need to read like these entire like large articles or books on like ancient philosophers. You can often just get away with the free preview on like JSTOR and just read that first page, and just getting familiar with the type of language that's used in these different subject areas, like old historians, philosophers, like architecture, like modern arts, and just getting familiar with how they talk about things. And then to this last point on this page, being able to understand it. And I like to tell people, like, you should be able to explain it like to your roommate or to your parent or significant other, just like as you're like having coffee or as you're like driving to the gym. It's not like an in-depth like discussion of it, but you should be able to read these kind of just cars like passages. And I want you to comprehend it enough where you could give the rundown to someone that's sitting next to you. You don't have to be an expert on it, but I agree. You really want to expose yourself just to the style of writing, so you're not just shocking your system with just cars practice, specifically cars and MCAT passages.
Yeah, my favorite acronym or reference, to the cars section is the cars stands for, can anyone read this stuff? And yeah, that's basically the first reaction, I think everyone has. And it is a big climb to get past that, to have that not be the reaction to what you read, but that's the bar you want to clear in order to really score well. And so it really just is about that grind sometimes. We are nearing the end of our little section here. And so we want to have some closing thoughts. Now, we've talked about the different roles of different resources. You have full lengths, you have content review, you have QBanks, and I work for Sketchy, and Paul works for Blueprint. And like I said, we work real hard to bring these high quality, resources to folks. Sketchy has some, Blueprint has some, and we actually team up and we do a bundle together. If you don't know all about what we do, want to talk a little bit about each. Sketchy, if you haven't heard of it, Sketchy is what you do in med school, basically. I mean, Paul said earlier, use Sketchy in med school as a med student. Just everyone in med school either uses Sketchy or knows about Sketchy. Those are the only two categories of people in med school. And we want to bring that to MCAT as well. And so we've made over 300 lessons. If you actually count individually, it's not 300 today, but very, very soon. Just give us another few weeks. But over 300 lessons that cover just everything on the MCAT. The one you can see here, this is our sympathetic nervous system lesson. It's set in a bar, a neo-noir bar called Fights and Flights with cyberpunk things. And that guy with the hair stuck up is piloerection. And we have acetylcooler because it's acetylcholine. And, this itself has 12 different symbols. That is the standard that we have, is we want this to be the best lesson on the subject that you already have ever seen. Plus, there are cartoons that help you with memory palaces, because there's a lot of really challenging stuff. There's a lot of really challenging stuff on the MCAT. Things are hard to memorize, and it's just a slog sometimes. And we try to make that difference. And when we talk about what roles we play, Sketchy is a content review resource. If you're thinking about whether it works for you, it probably does. You just give it a try. We do have a free trial. Just make an account, check it out if you haven't before. And this is the tool that we use. It's called the method of loci. It takes advantage of the fact that your brain likes to remember visuals and stories and humor and spaces more than it does just text and just hooking facts together. And so if you ever had to jam the fact into your brain that 5 carbon sugars are called furanoses, which I know I did, I never had to. I really wish I had this when I had to study it, because like you've got this little bear with the 5-sided head. He's a furry nosed bear. that's it. It's done. I just know what furnos is. And so on and so forth. There are hundreds and thousands of symbols. The way that this actually works, this is what Sketchy looks like. You watch lessons, then we have ways of testing yourself and reviewing afterwards, and what we call review cards. And then we also have quizzes afterwards as well. I told you, we've got, we got assessments. It's an important part of content review. And we actually work together with Blueprint to make sure that you can get all the different categories of prep in the same bundle, which is why we work together. So Paul, I don't know if you want to talk about Blueprint for a minute.
Yeah, so Blueprint, like I prepped with Blueprint, and I've worked with Blueprint for over 2 years now. And I really like how just customizable Blueprint is. So that study plan, that like Blueprint has that, and you can schedule that everything just like that day-to-day kind of basis. And integrated with Sketchy, you can pop in your Sketchy videos like, hey, I want to hit these 5 videos today. You can drag them around, you can make your own schedule. We'll auto populate it for you based on what days you want to have off, when your test day is. And so you get a customizable schedule that will auto generate based on our algorithms. And I think that just really takes a lot of the nitty gritty planning out of the picture if you struggle with that. And then we just have really, we strive to really make high quality practice. And with this bundle with Sketchy, you get access to that. So we have full length exams, and then we also have Q banks that you get access to with the Sketchy bundle. We have a lot of different services. You can see them. We have online courses. You can actually see me in the top of that live online class.
Is that you?
On that day.
Oh my gosh, yeah. You've been famous every time we've ever used this slide. You clean up well.
Oh, yeah. I try. And we offer all these things. So tutoring, I've done some tutoring, med school admission, but also we just have like bundles that are like, hey, you just want some full links? Come get some full links. You want a diagnostic? We have a free diagnostic. It's the same diagnostic you get if you're taking our online courses. Just come take ours for free. You don't have to buy anything, but just take it. And with that, you can start to get that breakdown of like, hey, this is where I'm struggling. This is where I'm really excelling. What do I do moving forward to kind of tackle this and fix these kind of content issues? And I think this is where I'm really excited with this bundle that we have with Sketchy, because it really just ties these resources in very well, I think.
Yeah, and this is real easy for you to check out. You can either go directly to the Sketchy website, and you can, if you see our plans, you will see the part about Blueprint, but also if you are here, you will be getting an email that also has, a link to it as well. Everything we just talked about, we bundle it up together. Study plan tool, full-length practice exams. We got several different sizes, 4 exams, 6 exams, 10 exams, I believe, where you get all of Sketchy MCAT, what we have today, plus all the additional content that we continue to release, and those Blueprint exams, and it sequences all of that work into study planners, including your test review. There are flashcards included in Blueprint. We got quiz questions over in Sketchy. It's just a really great time. And actually the third bundle is just all 3 of the resources we talked about. Sketchy for content review, 10 full-length exams for Blueprint, and Blueprint's QBank. So there you go. You got all 3. And I'm not saying like, yeah, you have to do that for your little self-prep bundle, but we try to make it easy for you. The reason why it's bundled and why it's helpful is because otherwise there isn't really a way to get your Sketchy assignments into your Blueprint calendar, like if you otherwise have it, but we've integrated on that front. And also because it's a bundle, there's like an additional discount on top of everything that there is, because that's how, all this stuff always works. So we really encourage you to check us out and hang out with us, I guess, asynchronously on, the types of classes we teach and the resources we make. I'm actually just going to leave everyone right here, just as a reminder of the way to structure and finish these slides.